Hi friends, and welcome to this video on how I got an A star in OCR-A A-level biology. If you are a returning subscriber, welcome back, and if you are discovering my channel for the first time, welcome to the family. My name is Deep, and I'm about to go into my second year studying undergraduate biology at the University of Oxford. And my mission with this academic empowerment project is to inspire, empower, support, cheerlead, and celebrate you on your journey of showing up for yourself and turning your dreams and goals into reality. Okay, so I did an OCR-A A-level biology in 2024, and I found it very, very difficult simply because, well, the biggest reason was because just the sheer amount of content that you needed to cover. And when I did OCR-A A-level biology, I approached it in the same way in which I approached OCR-A A-level chemistry, which I made a different video on. And despite the fact that this worked out in the end for me, this was my biggest mistake because my learning system that I used for OCR-A A-level chemistry just couldn't cope with the sheer amount of content that you had to cover in OCR-A A-level biology, which made my life very overwhelming. And so what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to first describe and explain step by step my learning system that I used to get the A star in OCR-A A-level biology, but then also talk about what I would do differently, knowing what I know now after having studied 1 year of undergraduate biology, which covers a lot more content than OCR-A A-level biology and a lot more quickly as well. Let's start off with an overview of the learning system I use for A-level biology, and we can divide this into 4 key stages. The first stage was pre-studying. The second stage was my main learning sessions, when I did the majority of my learning, and this was when I attended my lessons, did my homework, and created my flashcards, which I used Quizlet for. And the third stage was space retrieval, which was me essentially just reviewing my flashcards every single day. And I did this through importing my Quizlet flashcards into the digital flashcard app Anki, and then reviewing my flashcards on Anki every single day. And the fourth stage was doing exam questions and learning from them. Not just doing exam questions and leaving them, but doing exam questions, marking them, seeing how well I did, analysing my answers, and coming up with strategies that I could implement moving forwards to get more marks and do better. And I did this in 2 main ways. Firstly, throughout the 2 years up until A-level exam season, I did exam questions in the form of the physics and math tutor topic question packs before our school gave us our end of topic tests and before our mock exams. And then during the actual A-level exam season, what I did was I did the past papers, the full exam conditions, closed book, full timing, all that jazz. And I made sure to learn from both of these forms of answering exam questions. So let's start off with pre-studying, which was one of the things that really changed the game for me when it came to OCR-A A-level biology, especially during year 13 when the content became a lot more difficult. And when it came to pre-studying, what this looked like for me for A-level biology was reading the relevant textbook pages before we were taught a specific topic in lessons, and I used the Oxford University Press textbook for this, and also watching the relevant videos from this OCR-A biology specific YouTube channel called BioRach, and they're incredible. They draw out all the different topics and concepts and make it really easy to understand the bigger picture and how everything's related to each other. And it also helps with like identifying key marking points. So that's that. I would really recommend checking out their channel. And pre-studying meant that when I showed up to my biology lessons, I already had a pretty decent big picture understanding of the topic, the key concepts involved, why they were important, how they related to each other, why the overall topic was important, and the other topics it related to. Which meant that when I showed up to my 1-hour biology lessons in school, I was much less likely to get overwhelmed and confused, and instead was able to follow along with the lessons and what my teachers would say, which not only saved me stress, but also really enhanced my learning for several reasons. Firstly, it meant that during the lessons, since I was able to follow along and since I did the pre-study already, I could compare and contrast the different explanations that my teachers used to the explanations that the textbook and the BioRach videos used. And identifying the similarities and differences between these different explanations allowed me to identify the key principles and concepts, and also identify different nuances to do with the topic that different explanations emphasized, which really helped things click in my head and deepen my understanding. Secondly, pre-studying meant that I could spend more time asking questions to my friends and teacher during the lessons to clarify anything I didn't really understand, because I already had that foundational understanding. So I had the cognitive space to process all of that and still ask questions. And being able to ask these questions during the lessons and being able to ask a lot more questions during lessons really saved me a lot of time, because it meant that otherwise I would need to ask those questions and try and find the answers online at home, and being able to ask the questions in lessons just saved me a lot of time, since I could do it straight away in person and get an expert answer straight away that was reliable. Thirdly, pre-studying meant that for some lessons and topics, I was a little bit ahead. I could finish the practice questions a bit quicker, and then I had the opportunity with that extra time that I had to force myself to try and explain different aspects of the topics to my friends and my teachers to consolidate my understanding and identify gaps in my knowledge. And that really helped enhance my learning as well. And yeah, that was pre-studying. Now let's move on to my main learning sessions, starting off with attending my biology lessons. So during our biology lessons, our teachers would usually use a PowerPoint and or draw on the whiteboard to teach a topic to us. And we would also have opportunities to do some practice exam questions as well. And for the most part, we were allowed to raise our hand and ask questions during the lesson. And during my lessons, I did everything I talked about in the previous section, and I also made my in-class notes. And my in-class notes were pretty simple. I just made simple linear notes in a lined exercise book with the key things that our teachers said, wrote and drew, and included in their PowerPoints, trying to focus on understanding the bigger picture, the importance of different concepts, how they're related to each other, and how the details were important as well. Not just trying to memorize isolated facts of information, but learn in this integrated way so I had a better understanding. And in hindsight, I realized that mind maps was probably a better way to make notes, but during A-level biology, I made line notes, just handwritten in my exercise book, and that worked out fine since I was still doing that integrated bigger picture thinking, trying to identify relationships in my head. And making these notes in class are really helpful as well, because my teachers often explained the topics in a way that made a lot of sense to me, and they would also often provide us with the key marking points or exam technique strategies to implement when answering questions about that topic. So those are really helpful to note down as well. But yeah, that was kind of it. During my lessons, I just focused on consolidating my understanding by listening to the teacher, making my notes, asking questions, and trying to explain the concepts. And if I ever had a question, I would try and ask that question as soon as possible during the lesson, so I wasn't confused for the rest of the lesson and didn't waste that time. And if I wasn't able to ask a question, or if some other questions came up after the lesson, what I would do is I would either email my teacher or stay behind after the lesson or visit them during break time or lunchtime and ask the question then. And if I didn't understand their answers or their explanations, I would go to my friends, go to the textbook, go to the BioReach YouTube videos, other online resources like Save My Exams, to try and find the answer, and I wouldn't quit until I understood everything properly. However, the only times I would quit was when I realized that the question I asked was asking about content that wasn't on the specification, or the question I asked was asking about content that was on the specification, but was to a depth that the specification didn't require us to know. So yeah, and after my lessons, I would do the homework that our teachers assigned us, because they were great ways to apply what we learned, identify knowledge gaps and weaknesses, and sometimes even prepare us for the topic we were going to cover in lessons. And if I could do my homework from memory, I would try and do that to start retrieving the information actively and use my brain. But if I wasn't able to do this, I would refer to my notes and answer the questions using them. But ideally, I would try and attempt the homework through memory first, and then do my best attempt, and then if I needed to, add on to it, referring to my notes as well. The next main learning session I had was when I made my flashcards, and I did this using Quizlet. And when I made my flashcards varied throughout the year. Sometimes I made my flashcards on the same day or the same week of covering a subtopic in lessons. Other times I waited until we finished the entire topic before making flashcards on it. And it really just depended on how busy I was during the school year and when I was able to make time for it. The key thing though was I tried to finish making all the flashcards 2 weeks before we had our end of topic tests, so that I had enough time to begin reviewing those flashcards and learning the information a bit better. And I created my flashcards using the textbook, my notes from lessons, explanations from the YouTube videos I found helpful, and then also the mark schemes from the physics and math tutor topic question packs. And sometimes I only incorporated the mark schemes into my flashcards after completing the topic question packs. Other times I actually incorporated the mark schemes from the physics and math tutor topic question packs before I completed the questions. And this seems bad, but there was a reason why I did this. So for some topics like the transport of water in plants and kidneys and osmoregulation, the textbook is really great at explaining it so that it makes sense. However, the textbook explains it in a way that is like paragraphs of information and sometimes multiple pages. And so even though I understood the explanations and could explain the topic in my own words using what I learned from the textbook, I wasn't able to explain it in a way that was transferable to an exam answer. There was no way I was going to reproduce paragraphs of information in an exam. and there's no way that an examiner would want me to do that. So for topics like this, what I would do is I would systematically go through all the physics and math topic question packs for those topics, and then identify the key marking points for the describe and explain aspects of those questions, so that I could integrate the key marking points into my flashcards. And when I began to learn and memorize the information, after understanding the topic, I was also learning and memorizing the key marking points as well, which made my life a lot easier, because otherwise I would try and memorize paragraphs of information to then do the exam questions, to then find that all of the information I tried to memorize earlier was futile and I should have just memorized these key marking points. So I did that, but I never tried to memorize marking points from any of the application questions or the more application heavy parts of the application questions, so that I wouldn't cheat myself out of the opportunity to apply my knowledge, and I would then do the exam questions later on. And with my flashcards, I didn't really do anything fancy with them. I, for the most part, just tried to keep them one question per flashcard, and I tried to ask myself questions in a similar way to in a similar way to what the questions would look like in an exam for the different topics. So, for example, when it came to the specific and mean response, I didn't ask myself separate questions on every single step. Instead, I asked myself one large question, asking me to describe and explain the cell-mediated specific immune response, and one large question asking me to describe and explain the humoral specific immune response. And for questions like these that also had really long answers, another thing I found helpful was to have one flashcard with the entire really long answer, but then also other flashcards that only asked me to retrieve certain parts of that answer, which meant that as I was reviewing the flashcards for the first time and beginning to commit what I learned to memory, I was able to learn the information in smaller manageable chunks rather than trying to learn the really long answer all at once. And once I learned the information using in those smaller manageable chunks, I could then test myself to see if I could retrieve the entire answer with that longer flashcard. And if I got anything wrong, I wouldn't have to ask myself to review that very long flashcard repeatedly and very frequently until I got it right, but instead could just ask myself, could just review the flashcards that cover the specific part of that answer that I got wrong or forgot, which saved me a lot of time. Something else I found really helpful was for questions like interpreting hemoglobin O2 saturation graphs, carrying out certain calculations, analyzing chi-squared results, was having more generalized questions, kind of like recipe sheets, that outline the key steps I would need to carry out and the key words I would need to incorporate into my answer to get all of the marks in these sort of formulaic questions, no matter what they presented me, no matter what situations or variables or values they presented me with. All of that being said, though, is I made sure that I never brute force memorized any content or key marking points that I didn't understand, because your understanding is the foundation for your success in A-level biology, because it's how you answer the application questions and apply your knowledge and do well. And so if there ever was any content or key marking points in the mark schemes that I didn't understand, before I started to learn the key marking points or learn that content, I would read around the topic a little bit further, ask my teacher some questions, do the work to make sure I understood it first before I began to learn the key marking points, because otherwise I would just need to brute force memorize, and that's not fun. That means you're not learning to a very high quality, and it also means you're more likely to forget the information later on, and also means that you're not developing the understanding you need to apply your knowledge later on as well. So I would never brute force memorize anything. Now let's move on to the next stage of my learning system for A-level biology, which was reviewing my flashcards. And I did this through importing my flashcards that I created on the Quizlet website into the digital flashcard app Anki, which is a flashcard app that incorporates spaced repetition and uses a science-backed algorithm to tell you when you need to next review a flashcard based on how well you answered it beforehand, so as to not forget the information. And reviewing flashcards using Anki was incredible for me for a few reasons. Firstly, it meant that I could do some really high quality revision during my hour-long train journeys to and from school every single day, which really helped me make the most of my limited time. Secondly, it meant that the science-backed algorithm meant that if I stayed diligent and did my reviews every single day, I remembered almost everything that I learned in lessons and created flashcards on. And this meant that all the time I spent up until reviewing the flashcards wasn't futile and didn't go to waste. And this not only increased my confidence, but it also made my life a lot easier as I moved throughout year 13 and year 12, because the stuff we covered on later on in the course sometimes builds on what we covered earlier on in the course as well. So remembering what we already covered with such clarity, because I did my Enkidu review flashcards every single day, it made it a lot easier for me to learn new content as we progress through the course. So yeah, but that isn't to say that I was completely on it with doing my Anki flashcards. I'm human, I make mistakes. During the summer between year 12 and year 13, I actually stopped doing my Anki flashcards completely, which made the first few months of year 13 a lot more difficult for me because I had a lot of catching up to do. In the end, I caught up and it was fine, but I didn't need to make my life that difficult. So if you do end up using Anki flashcards, I would recommend making sure that you don't take a complete break from it, because all the catching up you'll need to do will make your life a lot more difficult. Okay, now let's move on to the final part of the learning system I use for A-level biology, which is doing exam questions and learning from them. And like I mentioned before, throughout year 12 and year 13 up until A-level exam season, what this looked like for me was doing the topic question packs from physics and math tutor, and then when A-level exam season hit during year 13, I switched to doing full pass papers in full exam conditions, full timing, closed book, all that jazz. And let's start with the topic question packs and how I would do those. So I would do the topic question packs before we had each of our end of topic tests and mock exams. And the way I would do the topic question packs is I would complete one question first without looking at the mark scheme. And then after I completed that one question, I would look at the mark scheme, mark my answer, analyze it to figure out where I went wrong and why, and then come up with strategies to implement moving forward to prevent myself making the same mistakes and then in turn do better and get more marks in the future. And only after doing all of that would I move on to the next question and repeat that whole process. And I'll go over in more depth how I reflected and learned from my answers after I cover the past papers, because I reflected and learned from my answers from the topic question packs and past papers in a similar way. But the reason why I did the topic question packs in this way, question by question, was that the mark schemes for A-level biology kind of repeat themselves a lot. For each topic, there are key marking points that do tend to repeat themselves. And so by doing the questions, analysing my answers, and learning from them question by question, rather than completing the entire topic question pack and then only reviewing my answers, what I was doing was I was giving myself the opportunity to begin to apply the different key marking points and exam technique strategies that I was learning as I went through the topic question pack. And that really helped me internalize and create habits of including those key marking points and strategies in my answers. And if I just did the entire topic question pack in one go and then began reviewing my answers, what that would have meant was it would have deprived me of that opportunity to begin applying my answers. And it also would have been a much bigger task to review my answers and learn from them, and I probably wouldn't have been as thorough with it, which wouldn't have been great. So yeah, that's what I did up until A-level exam season, which was when I began to complete entire past papers in full exam conditions, closed book, with full timing. And the reason why I waited until A-level exam season to do this was because, firstly, I didn't finish covering all the content before A-level exam season. So if I tried to do a past paper earlier on, I wouldn't have been able to answer a lot of the questions, which would have just been a waste of the past paper. And secondly, it meant that during exam season, I still had enough past papers available so that I could practice the exams in the days and weeks before my exams, which would improve my confidence in the exams as well. So that's that. And with the past papers, unlike the topic question packs, what I would do is I would complete the entire past paper first, then take a break, then mark my answers, then analyze my answers, and then come up with strategies to implement moving forward. And the way I tracked and the way I marked, analyzed, and came up with strategies from the top past papers was very similar to the way I did that for the topic question packs. So I wanted to go through that now. Let's start off with how did I mark my answers and then track my progress. So for each past paper topic question pack that I did, I created a page for it in a Notion database. You don't have to use this though. You could use an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, or just draw up a table, whatever you want. And in that table or database, I had the name of the paper or the topic question pack, the year the paper was from, whether it was paper 1, 2, or 3, the grade that I got, the mark that I got, the percentage that I got, the A-star mark, the A-star percentage, and the date I completed the paper. And tracking my progress in this systematic way for all the past papers and topic question packs, and being able to see how I was doing for every single topic question pack or past paper in this one view, and how my marks were changing over time, was really motivating. It really seeing a summary of how I've been doing and the progress I've been making really motivated me to be serious and thorough with how I analyze my performance and implement strategies to do better moving forward. So yeah, and after I tracked all of these statistics, I guess, what I did was for each past paper topic question pack, I did a marks analysis, which is something that I learned from Miss Esther Biology and Angela Jade from her book, The Only Study Guide You'll Ever Need. And what this involved was, for each past paper topic question pack that I did, I created a tally chart in which I recorded all of the marks that I lost and the areas I lost those marks in. And those areas were maths, application A, reading the question properly R, communication C, knowledge K, and statements per question S. And so after marking each paper or topic question pack, I went through all the marks I lost, figured out what area that mark belonged to, and then added it to the tally chart. And doing this tally chart was really insightful because it helped me visually and concisely see which areas I was struggling on the most overall and for different topics, and what were my biggest limiting factors, which really helped me figure out what I needed to prioritize in terms of improving my exam technique. After I did this tally chart for all the topic question packs and past papers, I had another section beneath that tally chart where I would begin to write down in 4 sentences every single mark that I lost, the question I lost that mark in, the area that mark belonged to, and the reason why I lost those marks. So, for example, I was like, I lost this many marks in this question in this area for XYZ reason. For example, for question 1A, I lost 1 read the question mark because I didn't round my answer to the correct number of significant figures that the question asked me to. And then after doing this for every single mark that I lost, I would create a new section beneath that where I would turn those 4 sentences of my mistakes into 4 sentences about the strategies I would implement moving forward to prevent making similar mistakes in the future and do better. So for example, with the reading the question thing I was talking about and significant figures, one of the strategies I would write down would be I always highlight the number of significant figures the question wants my answer to be in before I attempt that question. And then after I write my answer, I use my right hand to point to my answer, my pen to point to the highlighted number of significant figures in the question, and then cross-check to make sure that they match. And only after doing that do I move on to the next question. And side point, I didn't realize that you could use highlighters in exams, but you can use them to identify key parts of the question. You're just not allowed to highlight your actual answers. And once I realized that we could use highlighters, they really helped me during exams. I loved it and never went back. So I really recommend you experimenting with that and seeing if that works for you as well. And so that was an example of one strategy I'd write down for reading the question properly. An example of the strategies I'd write down for the marks I lost in the application area were things like always making sure I read and understand the entire question and graph first and what they're presenting me with before I attempt the question. Another application strategy that I learned was that whenever I was stuck about how to approach a question, an application question, I would think about the different topics the question was related to and the key concepts involved to help spark some ideas. For the marks that I lost in the communication area, what I often did, my strategy was often just taking the key marking points that I didn't include in my answers and then updating my flashcards to include those marking points. And then I would reset the due date of those flashcards and begin memorizing those marking points in that way. Another key strategy that I learned and implemented in the communication area was to include subheadings in my long 6 marker questions so that my answers were clearly structured and could reach that top band for those long questions. And for the marks that I lost in the knowledge area, my strategies would just be to read through and better understand the concepts again, do the work to understand them better, and then update my flashcards accordingly with explanations that made more sense to me. Another thing that as well was that I would always look at the different marking points that I didn't get, including the marking points that were in the allow section, even if I got 100% in that question, because the marking points that I didn't include were often things that would improve my understanding and also sometimes help me in answering other questions. So even if you get 100% as you do your past papers and topic question packs, I would recommend looking at the other marking points you didn't get and understanding why they were also marking points as well, because they can be really helpful. And after writing down 4 sentences about the strategies I would implement moving forward, I copied and pasted them into a different Notion pages for each biology paper that I had. And so before my exams, I essentially had an exam technique cheat sheet for each paper that I could read through on the day of the exams and the day before the exams, reminding myself of the strategies and marking points I needed to include in the exam to get the A star. And other things as well in terms of strategies were things like double checking my answers, ways I can manage my time, whether I wanted to do the multiple choice section first, then the than the structured questions or the other way around, etc. So doing all of this seems like a lot, but I think it was one of the biggest reasons why I got the A star in A-level biology in the end, because it forced me to be really brutally honest about the mistakes I was making, figure out why I made those mistakes, and then come up with strategies to implement moving forward so that I didn't make the same mistakes moving forward, and so which meant that I was actually learning and growing and improving my exam technique with every single past paper question that I did. If I didn't do this, what would have probably happened is, seeing I've lost a lot of marks, just kind of write them off as silly mistakes, then not really understand the root cause of them, and then not figure out strategies to implement moving forward to do better. So I would just keep making the same mistakes again and again, and that would be a negative cycle, and I wouldn't really be able to improve. So yeah, you can only improve your exam technique by making mistakes, reflecting on them, learning from them, figuring out strategies to do better moving forward, experimenting with the strategies, implementing them, and doing it all over again many, many times, and repeating that cycle. And making mistakes and learning from them is your best friend when it comes to growing and becoming an A-star biology student. So I guess embrace your mistakes and learning from them. Oh, I guess let's move on to the final thing I did before the exams. Another thing I did before the exams that really helped me was watching through all the YouTube videos in the paper-specific playlist and practical playlist made by Claire Biology, which is another A-level biology channel that is focused on OCR-A A-level biology. And watching these playlists of the different videos of all the different content and practicals in each paper really helped me, because it reminded me once more of all the content and gave me the confidence that I indeed did cover everything before the exam, in the rare chance that my flashcards missed out some pieces of information, which they did. Before one of my A-level exams, I was watching one of the Claire Biology videos and realized that I didn't learn how to distinguish between the different vessels that connect to the liver in a micrograph image. Claire covered it in her video, and there ended up being a question asking us to identify the different blood vessels in a liver tissue. So that really helped me in the end. And the novelty of hearing someone else's explanation, which used different language to my flashcards, also helped make everything I learned it last minute in those videos, if I didn't learn anything new, more memorable. And finally, what I found out was that during exam season, in the days before exams, I didn't have time to go through my Anki-Do flashcards every single day. And that brought a lot of panic and distress into those days and weeks before my exams, especially the days before A-level biology paper 1. So what I did to overcome that was I went on YouTube and I found this YouTube channel called Easy Mode Exams, and the person who runs it is great. They create YouTube videos that outline the high-yielding topics for each paper, and also some of their predictions. And they create new videos for all the papers every single year. And what I mean by high-yielding topics is the topics that are assessed almost every single year and that make up a large proportion of the marks available, which help me identify. And identifying these high-yielding topics helped me identify what topics would be the best to focus my limited time and energy during the days and weeks before the exams, before the papers. And this paid off so incredibly, because one thing I remember was I was doing the topic of cloning and biotechnology, and I really wasn't a fan of it because it was the last topic we covered in the A-level, and I only finished creating my flashcards for it during exam season. And because of that, it meant that I had a lot of flashcards I had to do every single day to remember all that information. And I was about to stop doing those flashcards because they ended up taking just way too long. However, after watching one of the easy mode exam videos, I realized he told me that cloning and biotechnology is actually one of the biggest focuses for, I think, OCR-A A-level biology paper 3. I may be wrong on that. It may be in a different paper, maybe paper 2. So what I did was, instead of giving up on those flashcards for that topic, as I did with many other topics, I stuck with it, and I did all of those flashcards, and I learned all the key marking points for that topic. And I was so happy that I did that, because in the end, there were so many questions in that paper that came up to do with cloning and biotechnology, and questions that I knew exactly how to answer and to get the marks, which I wouldn't have been able to do or say if I didn't learn those cloning and biotechnology flashcards, and if I didn't focus on learning the marking points for that after realizing that it was a high-yielding topic. So I really recommend, if you are struggling with figuring out where you should prioritize your time and energy, to go in easy mode exams, figure out the high-yielding topics and what your strengths and weaknesses are, and focusing on those high-yielding topics. And that's that. And then after that, I just follow my pre-exam routine, which I made a separate video on. And you can find a link to that in either the right corner of this video or the description box. And that was my learning system for A-level biology. But as I mentioned before, my learning system for A-level biology had one key weakness, which was that it wasn't able to cope with the sheer amount of content you needed to cover. And the biggest reason for that was that I made flashcards on everything. In the end, I had 7,280 flashcards, which was just completely unsustainable and resulted in me just losing my life outside of studying. And in the end, I had to give up on this because in the days and weeks before my exams, I had to cover a lot more topic question packs and past papers and make time to learn from them. And so I had to give up a lot of my flashcards, which really brought a lot of panic into my last few days before my exams. So what I'd recommend doing instead of that is I would recommend not creating flashcards on everything, but only creating flashcards on what you forgot or what you remembered incorrectly or what you got wrong. And the way I would identify this would be in the following way. First, I would make my notes for each topic and try and make them as memorable as possible using diagrams, pictures, analogies, and I would try and really improve the quality at which I absorb the information by identifying the key concepts, grouping them, and finding the relationships between them. And to help with this, I would make my notes in the form of a mind map, which I now do during university. And I would also integrate the key marking points into those mind maps as well. What I would then do is on the same day of finishing the notes for that topic, I would just try teaching aloud the notes, teaching aloud the concepts that the notes talked about, and just kind of like look, cover, check, repeat, that thing, and just to keep my memory fresh. Then what I would do is 2 to 5 days after creating my notes or my mind maps for each topic, I would do a mind map brain dump where I would try and write down everything that I could remember from the initial mind map that I created from memory to the best of my ability. And after doing that mind map brain dump, what I would do is I would identify what I got wrong and what I forgot and highlight them and also correct any mistakes that I made. And it's only the things that I got wrong or that I forgot that I would create flashcards on. And before I created flashcards on them, I would ask myself, did I forget this just because I forgot it? Or did I forget this because there was a fundamental issue in my understanding? If there was a fundamental issue in my understanding, I would read around the concepts a bit more, find an explanation that makes more sense to me, put my own words, add my own words to it, add the key marking points to it, and find an explanation that makes the most sense, update my mind map with that better explanation, and include that better explanation into my flashcards so that I did actually understand the concepts and was learning an explanation that made sense to me. So I wouldn't just brute force memorize anything. And creating flashcards only on what I forgot or what I remembered incorrectly and what I got wrong would significantly reduce the number of flashcards I would need to be doing, which would save me a lot of time. I would also just be a lot more efficient because there's no point doing flashcards on the stuff that you do remember and you do get correct. And what I would do then is I would just do those flashcards every single day. And then if I got any flashcards wrong consistently, I would flag them. And then on the weekend or in any spare bit of time that I had, I would figure out why I was getting those flashcards wrong. Was it, again, because of a lack of understanding? If so, I would fix that. If it was that the flashcard was too long or the language was not clear and it wasn't concise enough, I would fix that as well. And I would also update my flashcards with key marking points as I learned them as well. And then what I would do is 7 to 14 days after making the initial mind map notes, I would try teaching aloud the topic again, but this time not looking at my notes whatsoever. This time I would voice record myself as I taught aloud the topic, and try and teach aloud the topic from the best of my ability from memory. After completing that teaching session, I would review that voice recording and compare it against my initial notes. And again, I would identify what I got wrong and what I forgot. And what I got wrong and what I forgot, I would update, I would address any issues with understanding, and then I would create flashcards on what I got wrong and what I forgot, and update my flashcards, and then begin reviewing those flashcards as well. And then I would repeat the mind map brain dump or the teaching sessions again 1 month after creating the initial notes, 2 months after creating the initial notes, and maybe one more time during exam season, a bit closer towards the exam. And I would do all of this, alongside doing the exam question packs, topic question packs, past papers, and learning from them, and updating and creating flashcards on the key marking points that I learned and the key exam taking strategies I learned as well. And doing that, I think, would have saved me a lot of time and would have made my learning system a lot more sustainable. And now I guess I would just want to cover a few pieces of miscellaneous advice that I found useful or would have found useful as I went through A-level biology, and also highlight some of the OCR-A A-level biology resources that I found really helpful as well. So the first piece of miscellaneous advice that I found really helpful was revise for your end of topic tests and your mock exams like they are the real thing. Do high quality learning and revision from the get-go, from the beginning, as you go along gradually, so that you don't have to repeat everything again, which would take lots of unnecessary time and energy. And doing this would make your life a lot more easier and save you a lot of time in the long run. Secondly, when you do your end of topic tests, mock exams, topic question packs, and past papers, aim for 100%. Analyze and learn from your answers as if you're aiming to get 100%, even if you're not actually, just pretend you are. Because what this will do is it will force you to improve your exam technique and understanding so much, so that just in case in the real exam paper they throw you some really difficult questions, you will still have the skills and the understanding you need to perform comfortably above the A-star boundary. If you stop being serious about analyzing your mistakes and learning from your answers once you consistently get above the A-star boundaries in the past papers and topic question packs, there's a risk that you're not going to develop the skills and understanding you need to perform well, even if the exam is difficult. So that's that. Thirdly, what I found really helpful was just being organized. What I would do is I would have a chart or a tip sheet where I would track my progress throughout A-level biology and have it printed out and something that I could carry around with me and review every single day. Because that way I would never lose sight of not only what I needed to get done, but also how far I've come, which motivated me to continue putting in the work. So for example, what I had was for biology, I printed out a table, and on the left-hand column it had each each subtopic, or you could do modules of specification points. I found subtopic was fine for me. And then next to each subtopic, I would have a column for pre-study, and then a column for attended the lesson, a column for made the flashcards, a column for began reviewing the flashcards, a column for did the topic question packs, and then a column for analyzing my answers from the topic question packs, and a column for capable strategies to do better from the topic question packs, and then a column for began implementing the strategies. And then as I moved along through the course, I would tick or highlight how far along my learning system I was for the different topics, and that'd be really great. And I would also do this for the different practicals as well. And another thing that helped motivate me during exam season and during year 12 and year 13 overall was having an exam countdown app on my phone, which told me the number of days until my first exam, which increased the urgency of everything and again motivated me a lot more to show up and do the work every single day, because I knew just how much I had to cover in the little time I had. Another thing that helped me, that I learned from another YouTuber who was a Cambridge psychologist, was I printed out a table that showed the number of weeks until I had my first exams, and that is something that really helped me get serious about staying on top of things and revising and showing up every single day, because thinking about the time you have until your exams in weeks is a very, very scary statistic, and so yeah, that really motivated me and increased the urgency to help me show up and do the revision and do the work. And then just wanted to highlight some of the OCR-A A-level biology resources I found helpful. So I mentioned before that I used the Oxford University Press textbook for OCR-A A-level biology. The YouTube videos made by Cloud Biology really helped me in terms of going through all the content in the days and weeks before the exams as a last-minute review. The YouTube videos by BioRach is really great. Are really great for understanding the concepts and figuring out how everything relates to each other. Then I use Save My Exams a bit as well to help me understand the content. For practice questions, I use Physics and Math Tutor and Save My Exams a little bit as well. And to identify high-yielding topics to focus on, I really recommend Easy Mode Exams, like I talked about earlier. And another resource that absolutely saved me during A-level exam season was the YouTube channel Bio Exam Tech, which is run by a wonderful past OCR-A A-level biology student, and they are dedicated to creating videos to help you understand how to approach the different types of questions in A-level biology. For example, the describe questions, the evaluate questions, the explain, compare, graph questions, all that jazz. And the person who runs it also creates some of the most motivating and encouraging and empowering videos during A-level exam season itself before each paper. I remember that paper one for me didn't go really well and I felt so discouraged, but I watched the bio exam take video, and they helped me pick myself back up and do the work to show up as best as I could in the next few papers. And I think that really saved me and helped me get the A star in the end. And yeah, that is most of what I wanted to say in this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. And yeah, thank you and shout out to my A-level biology teachers and everyone else who helped me get the A star in A-level biology. You're incredible. And I wouldn't be here today were it not for you all. And as always, in case no one has told you recently, in case you haven't told yourself recently, I wanted to tell you that I am proud of you, I believe in you, and I believe in your worth and your unlimited potential and your ability to do incredible things in life, including getting the A star in A-level biology. Sending you so much joy and light deep.